Adios, amigo.
Listen, stranger. Did you get the idea? We don't like to see bad boys like you in town. Go get your mule. You let him get away from you?
You see, that's what I want to talk to you about. He's feeling real bad.
Huh?
My mule. You see, he got all riled up when you men fired those shots at his feet.
Hey, you making some kind of joke?
No. You see, I understand you men were just playing around, but the mule, he just doesn't get it. Of course, if you were to all apologize... I don't think it's nice, you laughing. You see, my mule don't like people laughing. It's the crazy idea you're laughing at him. Now, if you apologize like I know you're going to, I might convince him that you really didn't mean it.
Do you expect me to talk?
Hello and welcome to episode 229 of Do You Expect Us to Talk? I'm Becca and as always joined by my fellow co-hosts with no name, but actually do have names, Chris Byrne and Dave Bond. Also, this latest series also features our fantastic returning guest host, movie music expert Charlie Brigden. How are you all?
Good evening, folks.
Hi.
I'm fine, I'm just cheering up my horse who's a bit down.
Has someone insulted him again?
Yeah.
Someone been shooting at his feet again?
Yeah, he just didn't take to it well. You know, what can you do?
Poor old mule, I don't know.
I hope he gets a. I hope he gets a written apology, if I'm honest. Yeah.
What a personal and a public apology.
Yeah. What's his eyesight like? Because I don't know what glasses would look like on a horse. This has gone in a strange direction already.
I don't know, but I don't have a joke at hand for that.
What? It didn't occur to you that someone would ask about spectacles on a horse?
No.
Okay, fair enough. Okay.
That doesn't sum up our attitude to this latest retrospective review series. I don't know what does.
Well, yeah. This is, we've been promising this for maybe 6 years, because we did nearly a year of Bond, and towards the end of that we started talking about things. And Becca said, out of nowhere, why don't we do all the westerns? Right?
All of them, every single one.
Which would be quite a big task, I reckon. But when I looked into
quite
it...
tiresome as well.
Yeah, quite tiring.
But when I looked into it, it turned out there were only about 4 or 5, so we're alright.
There's a few sort of classic ones that we could really narrow down to the ones that actually mattered, or the ones that we thought would be worth our time.
We got sort of back and forth in conversation over it, and we did briefly talk about doing a Sergio Leone season, just all of Leone. Which isn't that's not that many films when you look. He didn't do that much. But I think Chris had a very negative experience not that long ago with Once Upon a Time in America. It's a film I don't like as much as I wish I liked. And so we decided to sort of stick with his westerns. That brings into play one I haven't seen, because you've obviously got the Dollars trilogy, and we'll go into that in a minute. And then you got Once Upon a Time in the West, which is one of my favourite films, full stop. But he also did A Fistful of Dynamite, which we'll get to, but I've never seen that, so we've added that to the series. But with Charlie coming on board, Charlie's got a couple of sort of suggestions we might get to as well. So this may pad out to a few more, but I think we'll probably get this one in the can and then chat about that offline. So there will be more to be added to this.
Yeah, we'll mention them as we go along.
But I still don't think it'll be a very long series. I think Charlie might add like 2 or 3 or something. So it might go from 5 to like 6 to 8. But we'll work that out and probably have a bit more on it next week.
No, I mean we tend to sort of follow like a sort of long series with a shorter series, or so. I mean, Bourne had a few films, and obviously we'll do these probably sort of 5, 6, 7, 8 films.
Yeah.
And then after that, I think we'll be moving on to Tolkien, I guess. I mean, they're really long.
Those films are quite short. We'll pad them out by chatting about tennis or something.
Half an hour will be fine. It'll be over very quickly.
I mean, to do those properly would take an immense amount of work, because obviously you've got, I mean, if you remember the DVD releases, they had hours and hours of appendices. They had, I think the Blu-ray versions, or was it the DVD versions, had something like 3 or 4 different commentaries on them.
And even of course, disc seats, didn't they?
Yeah, and then they came in 4 disc sets, and I think there were 2 discs of appendices or something like that. And there were obviously 2 cuts of the film as well, each film. So to do it really, and then of course you could be talking about reading the books as well, so you know where the differences are and so on. To do that properly would probably take a hell of a lot of effort. But
that'd be a podcast in its own, really, wouldn't it? I think
we'll still put a fair time to it. I'll be watching both cuts of the films, and I will read what I can. And I have got an audio book. It's written by was it Ian Nathan, the guy who was at Empire?
Yes.
Yeah,
he wrote a book. Without looking, it's called something like Everything You Can Imagine. And the audiobook version is about 22 hours, and it's all about the conception and making of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy. So I will be covering that as we go to it. With regard to tonight, Charlie, you've sort of joined us for this, and you are joining us for Tolkien, but leaving Tolkien on the back burner, what's your sort of background with this genre of film and this filmmaker?
I just always kind of really loved them, really. Watching westerns as a kid, they used to kind of show a lot of them on like BBC Two and Channel 4 and stuff when I was a kid, and also in school we did bits on American history. And particularly this pit, the Old West, as it were. So it's kind of from there. You know what it's like in school classes. They show you films instead of teaching half the time. So you kind of get on with that. And also the TV show Movie Drone, which used to run on BBC Two.
Alex Cox.
Yeah, Alex Cox, and then later Mark Cousins. And because a lot of these films were never properly released here, so the only time kind of you might get to see them was in places like that.
I'm trying to remember what I used to watch through Movie Drone. I'm actually looking now to see if I can find, because certainly before when we've talked about it, I saw the list of films they showed. So, for example, they did show their very first episode was The Wicker Man.
Yeah, they did. Sorry, go on.
No, I just say it ran for about 5 seasons, so you can go into the list and see everything they've covered.
Yeah, because they were the ones to show the Terminator for the first time.
That's right.
And Escape from New York and American Wealth in London.
I definitely saw the Last Picture Show on there.
Yeah, a lot of really real cult films.
Yeah, Barbarella, the Parallax of Johnny Guitar. That's a film I've reviewed very recently.
So that got a recent re-release, didn't it?
It did, and I did the sort of Blu-ray release of that. Struggling to remember much about it now, actually. I think
that's at the tape. Go and check it out, listeners.
Yeah, it's on there. I definitely gave it a decent review, as I recall. The Fly, the 1958 Fly, I watched that on there. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So yeah, there's a
great series, but they need to bring that back, don't they? I think.
I think there's room for like that sort of short film education sort of format, but without overwhelming or over intellectualizing it. It's only, I mean, how long did he talk at the start of the films, Charlie?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. It's not long, but it gave you. He was just a
Context.
master at giving you quite a lot very quickly.
Yeah, it gives you context, which is something that is very lacking today.
Well, I think that would come on to my next question, really. How best to word this? What is the context for these series of films in terms of you had a certain type of Western develop, and then suddenly these sort of dubbed Italian things turned up. So what can we tell people about the spaghetti Western?
Well, really, it was kind of filmmakers like Leone looking at the American Westerns and kind of wanting to do their own kind of take on it. But all of them doing kind of low budget. I mean, they're called spaghetti westerns. A lot of them were filmed in Spain, but they're kind of co-productions. But I mean, Leone's films really, his style comes out of both American and Japanese cinema, with John Ford's films, and then Akira Kurosawa's as well.
Well, yeah, and obviously probably the most commonly known fact about Kurosawa is obviously the Seven Samurai, and was obviously remade as a Western, more or less.
Well, this film was a remake of Yojimbo, isn't it? Yojimbo.
Yeah. Yo, Jimbo!
Yo, Jimbo! Jimbo Jones. Even to the point where, like, Ninja Turtles, the rabbit character is called Usagi Yojimbo, which is basically Japanese for rabbit.
I have seen Yojimbo.
Fun fact.
Yeah, I have seen Yojimbo.
I think that was also like Clint Eastwood's impetus for making this film as well. He was a big fan of that film.
I don't know, because if you look at the most recent Tarantino film, I think Leo's character in that is something of an allegory for Clint Eastwood, because Clint Eastwood was in a TV show for years, and sort of by the time he went to make this, you've got to remember he's in his 90s now, well into his 90s. He must have been, I don't know how old he was here. Was he
he's
in
a long career, hasn't he?
I think he was certainly in his late 30s by this point. And I think the common thinking of the time that his chance to be sort of a leading man had possibly slipped by. And he was mainly TV anyway. So I think, much like the Leo character in that film, it's just like, go over, shoot a load of, shoot some stuff over there. Worst case scenario, you make some money. Best case scenario, you find a new audience.
Wasn't it? Because was it Rawhide he was making?
Yeah.
And there was something in his contract, or he was making something at the time. Listeners, if you're wrong, correct us. If you know about this fun fact, let us know. Yeah, he was making Rawhide or something at the time, and there was a clause in his contract that he basically couldn't do anything else. But that didn't include anything about making films in Europe, so that's why he went and spent a few weeks in Spain and made these films.
Yeah, so...
well, that may or may not be true, I don't know. I just read that in an interview with Eastwood. But
I've read something like that, although I'd largely forgotten the details. There was like a bit of a get-out that let him go and do this. Leone himself had made very little at this point. He was in his mid-30s himself. And yeah, his filmography was short. He'd done a film a couple of years before called The Colossus of Rhodes. That's like a sword and sandal film. And then he sort of did these, and then Fistful of Dynamite, Docu-Sucker, whichever one you know it as, and then Once Upon a Time in America. And that was largely the extent of it. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure how everyone was put together to make this. But, yeah, you've still got a relatively young filmmaker at this point. What was Morricone at this point, Charlie? Was Morricone well known by this point?
Yeah. Because at this point as well, he'd been doing a lot of kind of Italian. He was doing political films, and he was doing stuff with people like Mario Bava, and things like that. And then he started doing, just shortly after, is all the giallo films as well.
Yeah, which is not an area of film I know that well, but I know you do. Yeah. Had he done much in the sort of Western genre at this point?
A couple of films, but not a huge amount.
Yeah.
It was just as the genre was starting up, really.
Yeah, and is this? I mean, I'm aware of some of the other filmmakers, Corbucci, Parolini, and like I said, I think it was off air. I also reviewed the Sabata trilogy recently, which was a little later in the 60s. Trilogy is a little bit generous. It's accurate. There are 3 films, but the first film is Lee Van Cleef, and the second film, very a la sort of the Die Hard scripts, was retooled from something not intended to be a Sabata film and actually starred Yul Brynner. And it feels totally different. It's nothing like the same character, this slightly sort of gentleman figure. And of course, by the time of the third film, it's back to Van Cleef again. But I very much enjoyed those. So Sergio Leone's not really the only game in town, is he, with this sort of genre?
No, and arguably Sergio Corbucci, who apparently, or Corbucci, I'm not sure. That's his name.
Well, you just guess it when it's written down, don't you? I think it's Corbucci, but I wouldn't argue too hard about it.
Is another one who, and one of the films he did, a film called The Great Silence, is arguably the best, for me, the best gay western.
Okay, well, yeah, Charlie had mentioned that film to us, but I couldn't remember its name when I was doing all the early stuff. So yeah, the Great Silence is going on the list. We will be.
Yeah, we'll add it to the lineup.
Looking at the timing of the film, it will probably go after the Dollars trilogy, but before Once Upon a Time in the West, so we're somewhat in an order. I've not seen that film, but I have heard of Corbucci. Again, referencing Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, there was a fictional film made by Corbucci that had Leo's character in it with Telly Savalas. And as Bond fans, we all went, well, that's not right. He was shooting on a Majesty's Secret Service at that time.
Hold on a minute.
He wasn't available. And the posters, they did false sort of fake posters for these films, and they were really good. And the one of him and Savalas, they're kind of back to back and sort of giggling their asses off. It's kind of
It looks really convincing, doesn't it? It's like
looks
I'd like to see
really
that film.
good. It looks really good.
I mean, even back to Tarantino, Corbucci also directed the original Django film.
That was a little later, wasn't it? Or was it?
That was 1966.
Do you know what I'm thinking of? Idiot. I'm thinking of the original Inglourious Bastards, which was 78.
Okay.
Nope.
Sorry, you're right. As soon as I said that, I thought, oh no, Charlie's going to tell me it's 66. I've seen that written down before. Bollocks.
Correction.
Yeah. All right then. So, Chris, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm feeling very old, and
yeah, Chris had his spell as Batman a few years ago. He's now hit the big 4-0, so we've decided he's now Alfred.
Alfred, oh dear.
Well, he said that, to be fair.
Yeah, raising my own Batman or Batgirl now, but yeah, I should say.
Yeah.
But
that's what we're doing. Is she okay?
The Batgirl film's been scrapped, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, shit, they canned it. Oh my god.
Yeah, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, all that money spent.
I wonder whether we'll probably see that anyway at some point. It just, I don't know.
I think it will be like another sort of release, the Snyder Cut, not with the same fan enthusiasm, but I think they've got a new guy in at the moment, and he wants to make his mark, so he's completely changed their strategy. After read tonight, Michael B. Jordan's Superman film is dead as well.
I think the thing is though is that a lot is riding on like this Flash movie, which is very like, because obviously they spent a lot more money on this, on the Flash movie, but a lot is riding on that of whether in terms of direction of the universe is going to go. So that's probably why that Batgirl movie has been scrapped, because it's like we don't quite know what we're doing it, and especially with what's his name? No.
Ezra Miller.
Ezra Miller, yeah. There's like, what the fuck?
Well, it's a scandal a day.
So it's like, do we just completely just reshoot the whole fucking thing?
I mean, it's a scandal a day, isn't it? Almost. Every 3 or 4 days you're reading something.
Like a lot is like riding on that. Like, what do we do with this film going forward? Do we recap? Like it's all speculation right now. But
and people are misunderstanding speculation.
Well, apparently, it was a tax write-off.
Yeah, I mean that's
Batgirl.
Well, I don't think it was made as a tax write-off.
No, but this guy.
I think I think because they've not
money they
publicised it, not like spent any money on like trying to on any merchandise yet. I think that I heard something about that, which means that makes it a lot more officially tax write off. I don't know, but
yeah, because it's a loss. You set it off against your profits.
But
I mean, in American law, Trump's been doing that for years. He hasn't paid any income tax for years because he's still offsetting it against unusually large losses years ago. So I would think it's that. The one thing that has caused speculation about where the DC universe is going is, I think, a slight misreading of the situation, because I think people are reading it that Keaton has now gone out of vogue again to play Batman, and what they're basing that on is they've done some reshoots on the second Aquaman film with Ben Affleck, and my understanding is it's because the Flash has been moved back, and he was going to meet Keaton's Batman, and you can't do that because he's introduced in the Flash. So they've gone, right, well, everyone knows Batfleck, so we'll get him back to do that. So there's a lot of like misinformation out there at the moment, and I think some of it is we don't know. But yeah, I did read tonight Michael B. Jordan had been working on an alternate sort of Superman. Calvin Ellis, I think that version of Superman is called. Black in the comics, totally sort of a canon version of the character, and I've read tonight that's not being worked on anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think it's probably for the best right now, because I look at DC and I think, where the fuck are you going? Like, what are you doing? Are you sticking to universe, or are you going to do all like individual films? Like, pick one. Like, make a decision. Like, don't like sort of dip in and out. And I think that's what they need to do. They need to sort of make a decision. Like, right, are we gonna kind of like go back and fix it and do like the proper universe and do a decent job of it, or are we just gonna focus on making like decent movies and just don't worry about shared universe?
Yeah,
I think this guy's plan is apparently to do Marvel.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's the case, but they're better off making that decision right now, and if they're going to do that, they need to sort of get their. They need to be consistent with one another. They need to be like, right.
Where does that leave Pattinson, though?
Well, exactly. I don't know.
And Keaton was in Batgirl as well.
He was. That was my point, because, well, it wasn't quite my point, but it was linked to it. My point was, people thought Keaton was out of vogue because Batfleck was back in for Aquaman, but that's because the order of the films has been reversed. But the second piece of evidence they're using to back that up is, well, they've scrapped Batgirl, which he was in. I don't know what the film would have been like. Apparently it didn't test great, but it didn't test any worse than like the Shazam sequel. So I do tend to think it's a bit of a kick in the face to everyone who's worked on it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's disgraceful.
And
especially as they were people of colour who not only was producing it and directing it, but starred in it as well.
Yeah, and that could have been a massive break. And I think the mistake you make as an executive is just thinking of the template of what you think a superhero film's for. So, to give you an example, I did not like Ms. Marvel. As a television series, I did not like it at all. But I fully recognise it's not really aimed at me. You know what I mean? And I know that there were large swathes of people out there, particularly young girls, who really did like bond with that piece of work. So yeah, not a great look for them, but yeah, there we go.
I mean, it does depend. Like, because what made me sceptical about it as well, like back to the original point, was like how many people actually was aware of it before it actually got cancelled. Because when it got cancelled, that's when it kind of got trending. So it's like made me think, maybe this is like a bit of a like, oh well this is we'll get a bit of traction. We'll release it on HBO Max or whatever,
apparently
and then it'll be a bit of a.
If they're doing it as a tax write-off, they're not allowed to.
Well, I mean that maybe, I don't know, but again,
that would logically make sense, because
that's what I've read.
If you're offsetting the loss you take on this against other profits or whatever, so you pay less tax effectively, you can't then go and start making money on it.
but I don't know what is possible in terms of what. I mean, I don't know.
I don't know either, to be honest. But there you go.
They could turn around and say, "Oh, that's fine. We'll pay the tax or whatever it is." And I mean, I'm sure if they want to, they'll find a way. Do you know what I mean? I'm sure they will.
What confuses me is test audiences scores don't mean everything, but they are one if not the main metric they use when they're sort of developing films. And we were told it was broadly testing the same as the Shazam sequel, which is going ahead, and they're ready to sort of talk that film.
But I think with that one, it's a sequel.
Yeah.
And B, it's probably not interfering with the grand scheme, like with what's going forward in terms of like if it comes out and it bombs, it doesn't really affect too much of what's going forward. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I suppose not.
It's like back to relate to the Flash movie. Like Batgirl is a film is tied to the Flash. The Flash is very much a big question mark at the moment in terms of like what's going to happen in that movie.
I don't even know how you market it at the moment.
We do. If you're going to reshoot something, apparently it's always had like reshoots as well. But
it's reshooting at the moment. He's been reshooting during his problems because apparently they're retooling the third act of the film.
Yeah, so a lot of it is riding on that. So I think the reason why we can compare it to the Shazam sequel is it's a bit of like it's less risky, or it's not going to make any sense. So, do you know what I mean? So if they change the Flash movie, then Batgirl as a next film won't make any sense because it's too tied to it. But whereas Shazam is already like a second movie and it doesn't really interfere with too much. So that'll be my theory on why.
But yeah, there was various things being done for television as well that are all being sort of canned. He's literally just completely rewritten their playbook within days.
Yeah.
So yeah.
We'll see. I mean, it could turn out to be a positive thing for Warner Brothers and DC. Could be, or it could just be like another big mess on top of another big mess, so to speak. I guess we'll see.
I mean, the thing is, they said, "Oh, we want to do Marvel," and it's like, well, you tried that with Green Lantern a few years ago. You're sort of irreverent fucking playboy character to start the thing off. That didn't work. And then you thought, no, we want an auteur, and you went to Zack Snyder. And funnily enough, the Snyder cut isn't. It's ridiculously too long, ridiculously so. But it actually has a bit more merit than I was expecting. But the fact is, he didn't suit that role. He didn't.
No, I mean, I've heard what potentially would have been his like the second Justice League movie, which would have followed on from that, and it was just like absolutely ridiculous. Like, I mean, I would be interested in seeing it, but it would have been absolutely like full blown Schneider kind of like that's not in the comics. That kind of shit. That kind of shit, you know.
Yeah. Well, once you kill off Jimmy Olsen for a laugh, I do sort of like.
They didn't even do a separate Batman film. They did Batman and Superman straight away.
Yeah.
But everyone knew that was a mistake.
You needed like another Superman film anyway. You needed Superman needed his own film before you went Justice League. I felt because
Superman needed to learn how to be Superman first.
Yeah, I felt you could have done with that, but yeah, which is crazy. To think like Henry Cavill has only had one Superman movie, and that was when in 2003.
So if they greenlit one now, the best you'd get is them filming next summer, which means it would come out in 2024, and we'd be looking at 11 years.
Yeah.
And for sort of.
But as Bond fans, we're used to.
Yeah, I know. Mind you, 13 years for Avatar, to be fair.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's not the way you build a universe, is it? Like, well, we'll give you a sequel when you're in your 40s. So, what? Okay. Well. So, a very different series of films here tonight. So we've got the Dollars trilogy.
So, Clint Eastwood.
Star of Back to the Future Part 3.
Moustache removed.
Sorry?
He's someone who's never had a moustache removed by CGI.
No, he hasn't actually. I'm a bit surprised. I thought, you know, would be some early CG on this, or like some paper put over his mouth. So this is sort of Clint Eastwood's star-making turn. Now, referred to as the man with no name, but he is credited with a name in every film. He's Joe in this film, and he's actually called it on screen towards the end of the film. So, is this meant to be the same man in all three films, or do we just not know or care?
I think it is, in a manner of speaking, because especially in Good, the Bad, the Ugly, he kind of like assembles the rest of his outfit for the series going forward. So Good, the Bad, the Ugly is basically like a prequel to the other two.
Okay.
But so I think, you know, yes, in a manner of speaking, but the thing with like Clint Eastwood and out the west in terms of his westerns, I have noticed he's a bit more of, he's not really sort of a character. He's a bit more of like what do you call it?
He's like an archetype.
Yeah. So like for example, like say he's done two films after these, which is what was it?
What, in this series for a few dollars more?
No. High Plains Drifter.
High Plains Drifter.
And
Pale Rider.
Pale Rider, yeah. Pale Rider. No, funny enough, Pale Rider is the western made in the 80s, which is extremely rare. But both their films are kind of similar. He kind of plays like almost like a ghost, and it's a bit more ambiguous about who he is. I think Pale Rider's a bit more like leans towards he's like a ghost type sort of figure who comes in, but it's really about like the town or the group of people within that. He's almost like a judgmental figure who comes in. So
it's an Inspector Calls but with gunplay. You know, an Inspector Calls where they're like a policeman comes around to investigate a crime and it turns out to be like a figment of their imagination at the end.
Well, it's called Inspector Ghoul, isn't it?
And it was all about them looking internally.
It's like he's a bit more like I would say he's a bit more like his characters aren't really like a fully structured person who you typically would say yes that is a character. He's more of like a concept who comes in. A concept. Hence, the man with no name is a lot more like he comes in and dispenses justice in what is fitting for the characters in the town.
Isn't that why you have the high shot right at the end? Because like, he's obviously come in, he's pit these two groups against each other, basically sorted them all out, cast a judgment upon them, and then perhaps that's it. And then he goes on his way.
Charlie might know a bit more about it than me anyway, but in terms of High Plains Drifter and Pale Rider and those are Eastwood directed movies, so I think he likes that idea more than maybe Sergio Leone. But so
I'm glad you mentioned these two films. I kind of agree there. That's the sort of impression that I get. That's the kind of archetype, sort of typical character that he would come to embody in this era of his career.
Yeah, because his character isn't your typical like white hat. He doesn't just show up and go like, "Oh, I'm gonna go in and I've seen a wrong." I mean, he does do, but in the way he enters in it, he's a bit more like, "Oh, I'm gonna fuck around. I'm gonna fuck shit up." It's a little bit more like mischievous in a way, and which kind of makes me lean. He's a bit more like, "Oh, I'm here to teach everyone a lesson," almost.
Well, certainly when I watched the Sabata films, which is obviously the same sort of subgenre, if you like, it was the same basic principle. He was a bit more of a sort of gentleman in his bearing, but he would go into towns and right wrongs, but not necessarily for the right reasons. He was all in it for himself. I'll do this and you give me $5,000. But he'd end up doing all the right things, but not necessarily for the right reasons.
Yeah, so he's kind of an anti-hero, and because of it as well, at the time, there was still a code in America, the Hays Code, and the West American westerns couldn't be like these films. So the spaghetti westerns were able to present these new ideas where there weren't just like white hats and black hats, as it was with the sheriff and the rustlers or whatever, or the murderers or whatever. They couldn't have that, and because So with these films, and then you had, it was 1968 when the Hayes Place kind of went, and you had what was called the revisionist western, so things like The Wild Bunch and films like that, where everything got a lot more kind of violent and was a bit more ambiguous about the western and western characters as they were.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think if you watched a sort of more traditional western as a kid, it's good guys and bad guys, and there's a sheriff in town keeping order. Well, the whole method of how there were no formal law enforcement agencies, were there? They were still expanding west, and there was nothing. I mean, the sheriff was just who they gave it to. Do you know what I mean? And it would vary enormously from town to town what they'd be willing to tolerate, I would have thought.
Absolutely, and then kind of you had the Native Americans as well, and the whole kind of thing as brownface, where you had white actors as Native Americans, which was going there.
I was saying early role for Fisher Stevens there. And what was it in Lawrence of Arabia?
That's a niche reference. Oh my god.
Alec Guinness in Lawrence of Arabia as well. Yeah. No.
I think nothing beats John Wayne as Genghis Khan. That's probably the best one.
That's like the ultimate cringe.
Well, I think probably the ultimate cringe is, isn't it?
It's like, I'm seeing Clive Warren.
Oh yeah, Breakfast at Tiffany's. That's terrible. Oh my god.
That's the ultimate cringe.
That is the ultimate cringe, actually. Yeah, that's. Yeah, just sort of look away now. I think
they portray that in Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, which is far from an accurate film. But like one of his first dates with his like future wife, they go to see Breakfast at Tiffany's, and he's just so appalled by that. She just sees his face and says, "We can leave."
Yeah, we can leave now.
Yeah.
Dear, dear.
So, A Fistful of Dollars itself, I saw it. I didn't see it till about. I'd seen bits of it. Like, bits of it are in other films. I mean, we're talking about Back to the Future Part 2. Biff is in the hot tub in alternate 1985 with a couple of women watching it. They've changed all the music.
Classic Eastwood, Bulletproof Vest.
Bulletproof Vest, yeah. Although they seem to have changed some of the music on it, even though that wasn't a particularly musical part of the film. But anyway, there was different sound on it. But the very end of the film was on there. So I'd heard the bit about the mule at the start, you've insulted my horse or mule or whatever it is he says. I'd seen the whole Bulletproof Vest thing, although I'd forgotten it by the time I watched it. I wasn't cued in until I saw Ramon's face as he was shooting him, because I then remembered it from Back to the Future Part 2. And I got the box set, like a DVD, quite cheap at about 2002. It was like a tenner for the 3 films or something. They weren't at all restored. I certainly know they were all restored 2 or 3 years later, and their alternate edits are Good, the Bad and the Ugly, which we can talk about in another week. And I sat down and I liked them just fine. I found A Fistful of Dollars quite a simple, straightforward film, and I'll more on that in a second. My memory at the time, and I don't think anyone would say it was the best of the 3, but my favourite of the 3 when I first watched them was the second one, For a Few Dollars More. I really, really enjoyed that, him and sort of Lee Van Cleef and stuff, and we'll see how I feel about that next week. Watching it this evening, there's more going on than I remember. You actually read a plot synopsis for this film, and it's quite detailed, if you know what I mean. So it's at once quite a simple film, but actually quite a lot happens, quite a lot goes on in only like 100-minute running time. But I enjoyed it a lot more than the first time I watched it. You can see it's cheap. I think whatever version I'm watching these days is far better restored than whatever I was watching 19 years ago. And that does have an effect, as much as you're willing to give films a pass. The first time I saw Once Upon a Time in the West, it had been beautifully restored, and that does have an effect. I saw a very beat-up copy of this film, and I'd already seen Once Upon a Time in the West. What had prompted me was they released that on DVD. If you look at our little sort of insert picture on Facebook and stuff that you expect us to talk, we use, at the time of recording this, it's effectively the front cover of that DVD. And it had funny enough, I think it had a quote from Alex Cox on the cover talking about Movie Drone. He said something of, it's something to do with death and stuff like that. And I'd already seen that, so when I went and watched these three, they just looked very beaten up. And I think by the time I got to The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, I found it a little too long on first watching. I've watched them all again since, and I've enjoyed them all. But I think coming to it tonight, what I'm watching is better restored. It's just more entertaining. I'm just more interested by it, and more thought has been put into the plot than some of the sort of imitators I've seen, because I've covered quite a few westerns of various types in recent months, and it might be Kirk Douglas rides into town and sorts everything out, and they all play much more simple than this. What about you guys?
Yeah, so doing all the westerns, obviously having done my American Studies degree and having studied aspects of American history, sort of early sort of frontier and Vespucci and sort of how the country was discovered, and also any interactions between First Nations, and actually going to America and studying some of the First Nations themselves. Western genre, I've seen like the John Wayne films. I've seen some spaghetti westerns, as it were, or all sort of classic westerns I've seen. It's something that I associate. I mean, they're no longer around, but like both my grandparents, particularly my granddad, so I couldn't, both my mum's side and my dad's side. I think it was something obviously they grew up with, the kind of like similar sort of where they got the idea for like Star Wars and Indiana Jones. It's very much those kind of Saturday morning Lone Ranger kind of style adventures, sort of the 30s and 40s. Sort of thing they grew up with, so obviously that sort of carried on. So I've seen those, but in terms of this sort of trilogy as it's come to be known, it's something that it's been on my radar for years and years and years. And then obviously when we come to do this podcast, and we sort of discussed doing all the westerns, I thought, right, I'm going to save it, and 5 or 6 years later finally get to watch it. So it's one of those things where American Studies student, I haven't seen these classic westerns, but I sort of deliberately missed out these series. Just because we came to do them, especially on the podcast, so I've been saving them up. And that's kind of like my history of it, really. It's one of those things, obviously, when you studied history and film, and read film at uni, at college and uni as well. So you kind of know all the tropes, and you also kind of spot out all the inaccuracies as well. It's quite interesting reading Eastwood's approach to it as well. Obviously, being sort of one of the few sort of Americans working on the film, with a really international cast, Spain, Italy, all over. He was saying, well, hold on, this wasn't historically accurate. This is, they didn't wear this sort of costume. That they did this or they didn't do that, which I think was really interesting. You sort of watch some of the films made at the time, and you sort of think, that's not really accurate, or it's deliberately inaccurate, for example. And some of the portrayals as well are very, obviously this was 1964, didn't get released until kind of the US and UK in like 67, even a little bit later. So it's quite interesting to see some of those portrayals that are kind of right on the nose, but it was quite common for the time. But yeah, that's kind of like my history with this particular series anyway. I've seen many classic westerns, but these like the Mama No Name spaghetti westerns as they've come to be known, I've sort of been saving them up. So I'm really pleased to be reviewing them tonight.
So I've funny enough, think all these the four westerns that we're going to be talking about, apart from Fistful, which I haven't seen. I think I've only seen them once each. Funny enough, though Once Upon a West had a much more of a lasting impression, which it's a bit more of an instant, like, yes, that's clear head above the best one out of them. But yeah, I remember watching I think Channel 4 back in '99. It must have been '99. Sort of showed these like week by week, maybe on a Sunday night or something like that. So I remember videotaping and watching this one day. And that's my first and only recollection of watching this. That and then realizing, holy crap, this is kind of like the same as that Bruce Willis movie, Last Man Standing, which is actually a remake of a remake of this, or Yojimbo, or whatever you want to. I wouldn't know whether what's it's more remake of, because I haven't seen Yojimbo for a true comparison. But yeah, it's basically exactly the same story. But yeah, no. But that's pretty much my only thing when it comes to my first experience watching this.
Charlie?
Maybe we could do that. Maybe we could add that on down our list, just for comparison.
Maybe.
Yeah, I remember. I think I saw them with my dad eventually, sometime in the 80s. I remember he was a real big fan of westerns, and at that time they were kind of repeating and showing westerns all the time. So we saw like a lot of the classics, and then saw these, and then I saw Back to the Future too. But it was interesting to see the film, those scenes actually in context. And then I saw them as an adult. I think probably the same DVDs that Dave was talking about in, I think it was 2000s.
Actually, that sounds right, because I'm saying 2003, but I bought them in a sale, so they clearly weren't new release. That would be right. They probably came out in 2000, because it was DVD, and DVD was the sparkling new format.
Exactly.
They could get away with putting out shitty versions of it. I mean, you've only got to see the first version they ever released of Rocky, and it was awful. So yes, it probably was the same set, Charlie.
Yeah. But one interesting thing was the good, the bad, and the ugly was the first time that I saw the extended version, which is kind of now seen as like the definitive version, as it were. And yeah, they weren't great transfers by any means, but it was just seeing these films, and certainly how violent they were, at a time when kind of you were just really into kind of violent films, really, and especially into kind of adult genre films, and kind of just watching it back now, it's kind of, it's just like the whole thing is just, I hate this word now, but iconic. And even not seeing it for so long, it all just kind of comes back to you.
Well, I knew much more of this film than I ever thought I did.
Yeah. And it's Sergio Leone. All of his films are impeccably cast, not just for the actors acting, but the way they look. And especially Eastwood at this time, I think he was about 37. But he looks older than that. And his face looks dried up in the sun, and everyone seems to have really kind of interesting faces. And when Leone does the big close-ups as well, it just kind of gives it a really interesting kind of language, vocabulary to the film.
Well, he shoots close-ups. I'm not an expert on lenses, but he shoots the actors' faces. I always said no one shoots faces like Leone, but that sounds really dirty, doesn't it? But he uses a widescreen camera on a close-up. He uses the wider lenses designed for landscapes, which tells me he sees actors' faces as landscapes of their own.
Yeah. And just making that iconography, and of course you've got Morricone's score as well, and it's also a lot funnier than I remember it.
It definitely is. The thing I would just want to say about Score, without going into it too heavily, is this is the one. This and next week's is the one I always have to hear before I remember which one's in which film.
Yeah.
Because as we speak now, I can't remember what For a Few Dollars More sounds like. But obviously, I'll look in the week. They're all of the same lineage.
Yeah, but The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly kind of has always kind of stood out, I guess. Especially
Has it got that ha-ha?
Culturally. It's like it's that tune is always seen as the tune of the trilogy, not just that film. So when anyone does a parody or whatever of the trilogy, or Sergio Leone films, they use that tune.
Yeah,
for instance,
if you see any kind of pastiche of The Man with No Name, the poncho and the narrowed eyes and the little cheroot between the lips, you'll get that.
Yeah, and there was an episode of The Simpsons where Homer was eating the chili at the local the chili fest, and he had his own spoon, and they did it a very kind of Man with No Name entrance, and they played the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly scene. One thing as well I didn't remember as much was the relationship between Joe, as his name is, and Salvatino, which was almost like a buddy cop thing at times.
I'd more or less forgotten that, because when you think of this film, you just think of Eastwood.
Yeah, and it just kind of shows how kind of well developed this film is. Also, Last Man Standing actually credited Akira Kurosawa, and the other writers wrote Rose Kikushima and Hideo Oguni of Yojimbo on the film.
I must admit, I've not seen Last Man Standing. I saw a trailer for it when I saw 12 Monkeys, because he had like a mini renaissance around then, and it was I'll probably get round to that, and I never did. I've still not seen it.
Well, it's a Walter Hill film, and it kind of, if you've seen his films, stuff like 48 Hours and The Warriors and things like that, and The Getaway, sorry, no, that was The Packing Father, but he wrote it, but he did The Driver and things like that. The Driver. Oh no, I'm getting mixed up with, what's that film Tarantino mentions in Death Proof? I was getting mixed up with that film.
Vanishing Point.
Vanishing Point. Sorry, got the two mixed up.
Yeah. And he makes films that are kind of almost with archetypes.
It is true of the examples you've just given. Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the Sean Connery film he did? Or am I getting mixed up with Lumet's The Hill?
Very possibly, yeah. Because he did The 48 Hours, and he did Streets of Fire. He did Red Heat, and he did Extreme Prejudice, which had Nick Nolte.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And he also did he did a western called The Long Riders.
Yeah.
Which had a bunch of famous acting brothers playing famous western outlaw brothers.
I haven't. Just mentioning The Wild Bunch, that's a film I'm staggered hasn't had a remake, because Magnificent Seven has.
He did Hard Times with Charles Bronson as well. I don't know if you mentioned that.
Cool. That's called The Street Fighter. Yeah. Charles Bronson and James Coburn, who's in A Fistful of Dynamite. I think
Some Comfort as well, which is...
Yeah. I think The Wild Bunch is maybe a bit less palatable. The Magnificent Seven was very kind of... It was sort of very traditional West, whereas The Wild Bunch is very much about the end of the Western era and about thinking about violence. Second part is this super kind of introspective period.
And oh no, I was going to say he did the remake of The Getaway, but he didn't do that. He wrote that, I think.
Yeah, because he wrote the original Getaway. And
Yeah.
presumably it was this script somewhere.
Yeah.
That was Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger.
Yeah.
In the 5 minutes they were married. Yeah. Okay. I've seen the original. The original's great. The original's superb. I haven't seen the remake. Yeah. Well, that's some part of Peckinpah anyway. Okay, shall we discuss this film sequentially, folks?
Pretty good idea.
Okay, so first thing that I would say, and again, it's just a budget thing. It's not intended as a criticism, but the sort of little town he goes to is very sparse, isn't it?
It's hard to think like you got like two rival gangs scene that consists of the entire town. It's literally like, well.
Yeah, they're just fighting over a barber's shop, and that's it.
Like,
you know?
How have they not either just gone like, well, all right, well, how come you just do the gun stuff? We'll do like the what's it? Is it the? It's not liquor, is it? It's
Yeah, it is.
yeah, and then we'll just like
one's running guns, the other one's running liquor.
We'll just be content with that, or we'll just split different streets kind of thing, you know, or just kill each other off. It's like because they are literally just across the road from each other.
That would be a great film, though, wouldn't it? He comes into town and sees two rival gangs cooperating rather nicely. Thank you very much. Stays for a beer and heads off on his way. Yeah. Okay. So this is a town on the Mexican border, and it looks it as well. And he sort of what comes first? He meets this. What's the gentleman called? Silvanito. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like kind of like a minstrel type character he wanders into, because there's obviously he sees like he sees the kid, doesn't he? And there's like a bit of like what's going on there, you know, with the kid trying to get to his mother, and then the kid's getting like shot at.
Yeah.
And he's just observing that. There's kind of like something's not right here. There's injustice, or there's like there's something wrong.
Yeah.
Here.
And that's kind of the first clue about his character as well, is that we see a kid being shot at and he does nothing.
Yeah.
He just watches. And then that sets up immediately as well, who's the woman in the window, who is the kid, why is he being shot at? Which immediately in the first couple of seconds just sets up all that, but then also sets him up as someone who doesn't look like he wants to get involved, despite the fact that we're seeing something violence against children.
Yeah, and it's kind of like it's kind of like with the thing about him being more archetype. He's a bit more of like he's not like a character as in a man. He's more of a like he's almost like another being who's there to sort of like judge. So at the moment he's just observing what's going on. He's like, okay.
Yeah, and of course this guy Silvanito is there to tell us as well what's going on. So we're introduced to basically, let's say it's two families. It isn't really two rival gangs. I mean, one of them's a gang, and then the other side's sort of the town sheriff, John Baxter, and he's married to a woman called Consuelo, and they've got a son called Antonio, who's teenage, maybe early 20s. And he could just see, and of course, as soon as he sort of goes into town, he's insulted by some people. And that's the sort of famous bit about you need to apologise to my horse, which is just brilliant. And the funny thing is, I knew every word of that without knowing I knew every word of it.
It's iconic, isn't it? Really?
Anyone watching along with us, would it be fair to say, and you can always let us know, when you heard that piece of dialogue, it was familiar to you, I would think.
It was, because I think it sticks with you after the first. I mean, I don't know whether it's because you like you hear it like repeated, or you hear it kind of like parodied or referenced here and there.
Yeah.
But it only takes one viewing for you to stick with, because it's a good, interesting way of doing it. It's like because Eastwood sells it with his like dangerous glare, as if he's like, no, I'm pissed. But what he's saying is almost like comical. It's like
I was thinking, because if you look at Once Upon a Time in the West, and there'll be a point about the good, the bad, and the ugly when we get to that film, but the equivalent character in that film is Harmonica, the Charles Bronson character, and Charles Bronson is actually more unsettling in the role, and he's even quieter in his way. But what he doesn't have is the playful element at all. There's nothing playful about that character. He's got what we later find out to be childhood trauma, and he's a lot more driven. Eastwood has turned up here and is almost a bit amused by all this.
Yeah, so he finds out about the family, and then makes a decision to what he's going to do. He sort of asks, who do you say is the stronger?
Yeah.
And they point to Rojo, don't they? The Rojos.
Yes.
So he decided to make his name for him by, just go over to the people who insulted him. He's like, okay, well, fine. And the thing that always makes me laugh, because he says to the guy who makes the coffins, it's like get 3 coffins ready.
Yeah.
And he goes on, and obviously he ends up shooting 4. And he walks past. It's almost like, feels like it's ad play. He goes like, sorry, 4.
That
always gets me. That always gets a laugh out of me.
Yeah. So yeah, he's immediately made his name and wound them both up. He does meet the Baxters, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
And he almost insults the sheriff straight away until he realizes he is the sheriff. This is we go straight to the chest of gold, don't we? Moves quite quickly, this film. So there's some Mexican soldiers, and they're escorting like a big thing of gold. Which is
it's like the big stagecoach, isn't it, basically? And there's like you can't see inside. He sort of goes to have a look inside, and there's a guy that comes out and pokes a gun in his face. Basically, it's like a
But they're
move along.
They're immediately dispatched by Rojo's gang. So they've basically taken the gold. But what he does next is just where this film is just a lot more thoughtful in his plotting, taking a couple of the bodies.
That's a really smart move, actually, isn't it? You can kind of see he's several steps ahead of both of the gangs. And
sells information to the two groups. So for money, to say there's 2 soldiers who saw what you did and they survived and they're at they're here. And so the factions basically race there. The Baxters want the survivors so they can testify against what's happened, and obviously the gang want to kill them. And he basically stages Ramon killing them again. And they capture one of his brother captures the son of the sheriff. And this is when we meet the sort of family caught in the crossfire a bit. Marisol?
Yeah, Marisol.
And
Jesus.
Yeah, the little boy. He was also dubbed.
So they've basically, the gang have framed her husband as a cheat during a card game and taken her prisoner, forcing her to live with them. And so Joe sort of heads out to try and free her, but then sort of wrecks the house to make it look like the Baxters have done it, and then basically gives her money to leave the town.
Yeah. Which part of me thinks they really need a horse, because I don't think they'd get away.
No.
Because they're like, there's something about like they're just wandering off the desert. Like, they're gonna get caught, aren't they? Sure.
You would think so.
But for the sense of the film, like, I don't think they get away.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. The thought of Quantum of Solace, just throw them a can of oil. You'll be drinking that within 20 miles.
Yeah, Spectre will find you, don't worry.
And we don't get that. This is again the difference. When you get to Once Upon a Time in the West, you keep getting little snippets from what appear to be Harmonica's memory of a very young Henry Fonda. Takes you a while to see it's him, but it's not that late into the film you find that out. But we don't know the full story. Whereas here, when he's sort of asked, why are you helping me? It's like, well, I knew someone like you. There wasn't anyone there, to help.
Yeah, he doesn't really give much. There's not much backstory, much knowledge towards. It's not towards the end of the film that you kind of realise, oh, okie dokie. Yeah, it's just one of those things. Like he is. I do kind of agree with what you said at the top of the show. He's kind of like he is a little bit of a ghost, but he's also more of. I don't know. Is he God? Does God come along and try to sort out? I don't know. There's all kinds of subtext that you can read into it. I'm sure there's a reading somewhere. But he's sort of like this more of a character and less of a character and more of like a force that kind of moves through the film.
Yeah, he's. I mean, he is played more as a man, but yeah, I think it's just like as the aesthetic, It's as you say, because we did this. What he does with the family is more. It is more an act of conscience. He's like, nah, I'm doing this 'cause it's the right thing. I've made money. I'm going to do it. Yeah.
But this is where the film is at once sort of complex and really simple. Complex in that the degree of thought that's gone into his plotting is actually quite involved. Right, so take them.
Quite complex. It makes quite simple.
But we're deep into the second half of the film already.
Yeah.
It actually flies through quite quickly. So once they realise what he's done,
it's one of those things where like we could, it's complex in like it has lots of immaculate detail. But if we were to talk about so sequentially, talking about all the immaculate details, it would bore the shit out of everyone. So
yeah, it would take like 3 hours. I mean, to be fair, this film is it's like what, an hour and a half, hour and 40, and it does rattle along really, really quickly.
The version I watched was 100 minutes, like literally exactly.
Yeah, spot on, definitely. I think because there are lots of different cuts and edits that, and especially of different versions if you're watching on DVD, Blu-ray, Laserdisc. Compared to like, I think by this point certainly, as Charlie sort of mentioned, this kind of the Western, the idea of the Western was kind of like already in decline by this point, and this film came along and kind of really gave the genre like a shot in the arm, as it were. But if you look at some of, I mean, not they are classics, but sort of like the John Ford sort of westerns are so long films. I mean, today it's the norm as films are pretty much 2.5 hours, 3 hours plus now. Whether we agree or not is another story. But I think, its runtime really, it's why it's part of parcel of why this film is such a classic, because it does, it's roughly an hour and a half, a little bit for a few minutes more. It does rattle along, and you kind of have, it's very quick, and cutting editing is quite pacey as well. So you really have to kind of, pay attention.
They get longer though. This is why I've always thought this is the sort of simpler judge. Yeah, because next week's like half an hour longer.
Really all becomes like long, sort of long shots as well. And as you mentioned, there's kind of really wide landscape kind of shots, in there you have like really tight close-ups on people's faces of their eyes as well. As you say, their faces alone, they are a landscape, and they can tell a story as much as the landscape of the sort of Spain and Italy, where this film was shot, obviously standing in for Arizona or wherever, or Mexico-US border. So the whole idea that somebody's expression in their face can also tell that story as much as any sort of physical landscape. Well, that sounds really stupid, but you know what I mean.
Well, the films really get more kind of expanded as they go on.
Yeah, they do.
Because this one with a tiny town, and just a little kind of stagey, almost interpretation of Kojimbo, and then for a few dollars more is a bit more complicated, and then when you get to the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's like an epic.
Yeah, they grow really quickly. I think the first time I saw them, I just found for a few dollars more in sort of the sweet spot of what I wanted. But I don't necessarily agree with that on rewatches. We'll find out, I suppose. But yeah, this is very, very simple by comparison. But it's not simple like some of these I've been watching in recent months for review, where they come into town, pull some caper, and it's over. There's actually some thought gone into the plotting here.
Yeah.
But yeah, at this point, now, he staged it to look like Baxter launched the attack, but also he's killed some of their crew and all the rest of it, so he's still of interest to them. So they capture him and beat him up. And funnily enough, there's not a lot of blood in this film. When you see people shot, there's no squibs or anything. They probably wouldn't have had the money for anything like that. But his beating is actually quite brutal.
Yeah.
It is, yeah. Literally, I was there's something that quite shocked me actually. I mean, a lot of this looks like really stupid, but it's kind of like a lot of films of this era where you see blood, it looks a little bit like red paint, but that was just kind of like makeup, at the time. But I think this one, when you see him kind of emerge after being beaten up for days on end, like one eye is basically sealed shut, he's bruised, he's got a massive bruise and burn marks on his hands. It's going to take him longer than a week to recover from his injuries. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, every time I think of blood effects in this sort of era, I think of Jamaica in Dr. No when she's shot through the window, and the blood on the carpet literally just looks like paint. Yeah, but
red ketchup, tomato ketchup.
And actually, the way they kill the Baxters is kind of brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that there's that through line, isn't there? Kind of how. Yeah, I sort of agree. With what Charlie said. It is. I mean, it has like. What rated, like 18 rated. I'm not sure what their certificate it was slapped with at the time. Maybe X, I don't know. But yeah, just the kind of violence of it. I mean, there is that through line. Obviously, it casts a huge shadow over any sort of Western or even obviously things like Mandalorian TV shows and that everything made today, which obviously itself, Star Wars has that huge kind of Western in space aspect to it. But yeah, just the violence of it is also pretty shocking for the time.
Well, I was watching it and people were getting shot and like just falling over and no blood or anything like that. And I thought they'd pulled the punch, so to speak. But then when you see how beaten he is and how brutally the Baxters are treated,
there's your violence.
It's money. It's money. That's the only reason we don't have squibs and blood effects and stuff like
exactly.
that.
But a lot of it, and also is quite psychological as well. That comes a lot of it, like how like Marisol is treated, and how Consuelo is treated, and a lot of that is psychological aspect as well.
Yeah, and I mean, if you throw forward to something like Unforgiven, I think although Clint Eastwood had no role in writing this, and his own record with women is somewhat questionable, he does seem to have an interest in portraying the difficulties of life for women. Because it's very much a theme in Unforgiven, the sort of prostitutes in the town, the sex workers, and how they're treated, and he tries to like rightly sort of humanise them and actually make like full characters out of them. That's a great film as well. With a hell of a cast.
It's like his final swan song, is it, to the genre, really, isn't it?
Yeah, because again, it's also it's the death of the Old West, but it's also the death of the old version of him. It's his last reprise of a very violent man he left behind for love. What was he called in that film? William Money or something like that?
Yeah, William Money.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll throw Unforgiven on this if you guys want. We'll see. Getting
bigger and bigger.
We can do as many of these as you want. We did promise all the westerns.
You want us to cover? Let us know.
Yeah, why not? So, so the family are basically burnt out of their house and then sort of killed while pleading on the sort of front porch.
Especially seeing the matriarch shot like that.
Yeah, that's quite shocking as well, isn't it? And and her reaction as well. It seems quite visceral.
Yeah.
And
I wasn't prepared.
And often the decent men in this are like married. And I think with the sort of untamed Old West, it takes a woman to come along and sort of civilise them, which is exactly what happens to the William Money character before the events of Unforgiven, because he was a heartless, ruthless killer, and then he fell in love and he built a life and a family.
Yeah, he sort of became tame.
And the West itself was dying anyway. So now the Rogers are the only gang left now. The Baxters are dead.
Yeah.
and
They're torturing. What's it called?
Salvatino.
Salvatino,
yeah.
Sorry, some of us are going to struggle with these names.
Tied up, yeah. He's basically like not hung, but he's like, well, I don't know if he's hung. We don't see him without his trousers on, but no. But I mean, he's hanging by his hands, not his neck. When I say like hung up, and then just ruthlessly beaten. So he's just hanging there in insane heat, badly beaten.
Yeah. It's the Undertaker, isn't he? Who he stows away with.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he sort of sees what goes on.
He's basically been sort of healing in like a little cave somewhere. And actually, it does foreshadow the bulletproof vest, but I don't think we know what he's doing. In fact, if I didn't know about the bulletproof vest, I think he would be checking his gun is still working correctly.
Well, he's probably doing a bit of both.
Probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
The thing is also is like we see like the armor, or there's like the old like sort of knight's armor with like bullet holes, and before that we have Rojo sort of shooting at the armor with Eastwood. And that's with the whole thing about like how he thinks like the rifle's better is a better thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Somehow I think that seems to be like a theme that comes back, like using like
the whole thing with technology. Because he talks about the rifle, but there's also the kind of machine gun that he uses to kill all the Mexican army guys.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at how they were referred to.
Yeah, I'm not too sure.
It's a Gatling gun, basically.
Yeah.
Oh, it was a Gatling. Okay.
Yeah. And it's very much a theme. If you ever play like the Red Dead Redemption games, they turn up in a couple of missions in those. Yeah. They're quite satisfying to play in the video games. Yeah.
It's a big part of the Wild Bunch as well.
Yeah.
Well, it is. Yeah, it's almost kind of the guns and weapons and everything are almost as iconic as themselves.
It's enough in Django as well.
Yeah. It's carries around in his coffin.
Yeah.
I've not actually seen the original Django. I say the original. There is only one Django, isn't there? It's just people think you mean Django Unchained these days.
Yeah, well, there's loads of them.
Yeah.
It's almost Django almost became its own kind of like mini, kind of almost like Bond almost, but being made by different people.
Well, I did make the point with Sabata that had they kept continuity and the Western genre wasn't dying away, that could easily have been such a character, because he had a very distinctive gun, he had a very distinctive manner and way of dressing, and when he was introduced at the start of the first film, it wasn't unlike the way we were introduced to like Bond. It was like lots of shortcuts of his hand and the back of his head and things like that, and it was a slow reveal to a character that was meant to be distinctive and was definitely being designed for a series of adventures, because there's endless towns he could go to. And he was designed to be somewhat iconic in look.
Yeah. He's got a very distinct silhouette to him.
Yeah, Lee Van Cleef again appears as two completely different characters in this series.
Yes, we'll see him next week. So now it's just for the final duel. He heads back into town. They always thought he was dead, but obviously he's not.
He's got the armour.
Well, we don't know this because he's got the poncho back on.
No, that's it.
So he's getting shot and then sort of getting back up and saying, no, you've got to get me in the heart.
He's actually Captain Scarlet.
So, which is a nice double bluff, just get me in the heart. Don't shoot at my head, please.
Yeah, right? He mentioned it quite a few times. Don't forget the heart,
Yeah.
Well, it's like it's his comfort. His go-to. He always goes for the heart.
Yeah.
So he would never. I think even if he probably went for the head, he'd probably miss because that's his go-to.
He's obsessed with the heart, pretty much.
Well, he does miss a couple of times, doesn't he? When he's getting more riled up.
Yeah, he's so desperate, and you can literally see like the sweat, the beads of sweat down his face.
Clint excites him so much he shoots his entire load.
Quite literally.
No, but he does. He runs out of bullets, and basically Clint's got one. Shoots his sort of compadres.
You can kind of see this scene as well. This is something really, really stupid, but please have a laugh at my expense. Dirty Harry. literally here, did I hear 6 shots or only 5? You know, it's a little bit like that. Obviously,
Oh yeah, I suppose it is.
with two difference in guns. I know that's really a really long stretch, just because it happens to be the same actor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did think of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because he uses his last bullet to shoot down Silvanito.
Yes.
And if you see where The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly starts, and the little sort of tricks they're pulling, him and Eli Wallach.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's got this like gift for just shooting a rope.
Yeah, he's a real sharpshooter, isn't he? I mean, the sort of characters that he plays are quite handy with, you know,
without spoiling The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, because it is the setup at the start of the film. They've got this kind of thing where they take it. Eli Wallach's character's wanted various places, so Clint Eastwood takes him in, collects the bounty on him, and then stays at distance and shoots him down as he's about to be executed each time. Then they get him out, and then they go to the next town and do it again. And that's the sort of basic setup for that film. And that's it. It basically reveals the bulletproof vest and then shoots Ramon, and that's the film basically.
They have a bit of a they have a bit of like they give him like one bullet to reload.
Yeah.
So sort of like.
Yeah, he literally drops his gun, so they've both got to reach down to pick it up.
Yeah, and reload it, and then obviously he gets there first.
Yeah.
And Salvino shoots the other guy who's hiding.
Yeah.
Esteban,
yeah. Yeah. Who is not as big a part of this film as his brother. I do have a tendency to forget him a bit.
Yeah, he's a little bit overshadowed, isn't he?
He's memorable for that laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's
shooting the woman.
Oh,
yeah, he has that. He's that. Sort
that's his trademark, pretty much.
He has that villainous laugh. He's like sort of like laughing when horrible things are happening, and it's just you feel like
you bastard, you know.
Yeah. It's just that classic sort of thing where you just like I can't.
Excuse my language.
Yeah, and then he rides off to the sort of sequel.
Rise off into the sunset.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when you think of films like this, I mean, it's very much like what they're trying to do with the Jack Reacher series. You know, one adventure with one cast in one place, onto the next town, new cast, new issues.
Same baddie.
Well, yeah, but
well, actor-wise, anyway.
Yeah. But that would happen in Sabata as well. You'd get people coming back to play different characters, so it was like a repertory company almost.
Yeah.
In a different world, there could have been a lot of these.
I thought he was a really good actor, actually. I mean, it was really well done that there was all this talk of Ramon, and then when you finally meet him, he is kind of charismatic and is with a lot of presence that he needs for that role.
You can't take your eyes off him in that last scene when he's firing his gun. I've always thought there's something very slightly Omar Sharif about him.
Yeah.
And I don't know much about him. I don't know what he went on to do. I'm just going to look him up actually.
Yeah, well, he did a lot of Poliziotesi films in Italian crime drama films in the 70s.
I've done a few of those recently.
Yeah.
I can't remember what the hell the names of them were now though. I
did. Can't be that good.
I did a couple of them very recently. Let me just look them up.
They've all got very strange names. So sometimes they.
But the one I watched was really hardcore, like the violence in it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I'll see if I can find it. Hang on, I've got to find my reviews because I did it about 3 months ago, and I did 2 films in a set, like a 76 and a 77 Italian film.
Oh yeah.
And it was. Hang on.
I wonder if we should do like Italian film series.
It was the
We'll get Charlie on and we'll do the Giallo.
It was The Big Racket. Fabio Testi. That was the first one. And then the second one, the Years of Lead films. And then the second one was The Heroin Busters, which was nowhere near as good. The Big Racket was good, but it was pretty hardcore. I mean, there's a very, very harsh sexual assault scene in it. Let's put it that way. And they've put, there's things in that film you wouldn't be able to get into a film now, let alone then. I looked him up. He didn't live to much of an age. He died at 61 in 1994. And yeah, I haven't seen, apart from for a few dollars more, obviously, I don't think I've seen anything else he was in.
Yeah, because he was in a Bullet for the General.
Yeah.
By Damiano Dimanti. Again, the pronunciation. My pronunciation is terrible, so you have to edit this. Damiani, who is probably well known to a lot of people for directing the second Amityville film.
Yeah.
The one with the incest.
Yeah.
Is that the one with what's his face from Rocky?
With Burt Young, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this thing. Anyway, that's just a whole bunch of dead air. I was looking if there was something else I'd seen him in, because he was very, very well known. Marion Koch I've seen before in something, and I can't think what. Marizol's character. Deflatormas? I may have seen that. Anyway, so yeah, obviously with a lot of these characters, particularly actresses, a lot of actresses in that era sort of gave up to have families, didn't they?
Yeah.
So she doesn't work much past the age of about 50. And the vast majority of it is before she's out of her 30s. Okay, so yeah, we'll obviously see him again next week. I don't remember the sequel as well, because I've seen A Fistful of Dollars more often. Just some final thoughts on the film for me. It's definitely a lot simpler than what's coming. And I would say it's probably... its simplicity makes it a very easy watch, but it's probably a little bit less satisfying as a result. But it does have that slightly sort of impish sense of humour to it. It does have, in the devil's in the detail. The details of the plot are very good, even though the broad strokes are quite quick to get through. It's definitely a star-making turn, and when you think how little dialogue that is, it shows you how much work his face is doing, really, to give him that sort of cachet. This was made for a couple of $100,000 US. So by the time we get to Once Upon a Time in the West, which he's not in, of course, that's up to sort of $5 million. The budget will be tripled next week. So they will get more expansive, and they will get a little bit more ambitious in terms of what they're trying to do. But this is a solid film, and it's a solid film that's worth watching. And I also think it's a good way to sort of be introduced to this type of film, because it's a good example of this type of film. You know, like Charlie said, not black hats, just morally complex people, because that's how life tends to be. And creating the West as full of good and bad guys it's a very lawless place, and that these films evidence that, but it evidences it with shades of grey. And as such, not that we recommend, not that that's how we tend to do this thing, but I do think it's worth a look.
If you're looking into sort of get into filmmaking and writing film, and this is it's kind of film school stuff really, but it's one to, if you're looking into kind of learning about how films are made, this is a good one to watch as well, in terms of like shot composition and as you mentioned, like use of lenses as well. So it's
I would say to add to that point, I would say from what I hear of common sort of inexperienced script writers' mistakes is they tend to fall in love with the dialogue too much and put way too much in. And this is sort of how you can do more with less.
Yeah, this is an exercise in less is more, isn't it? Pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's just, it amazes me because you watch this and you're thinking like, this was Eastwood's star-making turn, because
I know he never made a big film before this. You think what?
You just automatically like assume that he's already a star at this point.
Yeah.
He's like, it's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy.
Because it seems that way. It doesn't seem like, oh, this is like young Eastwood. This is like this is like, oh, this is just a bit like, just just getting this shit together. He's
this is his big screen debut. I mean, I've sadly not seen Rawhide, but he wasn't the star of that, was he? I don't understand. Or he was, sort of part of the ensemble cast.
I think he was in other films, but not as a star.
He had bit parts in stuff like Tarantula and Revenge of the Creature and stuff like that.
Yeah, but he wasn't. This was like, as you say, like the real star-making turn.
I read earlier that apparently Fistful of Dollars was offered to his Rawhide co-star first.
Oh, and he said no. I'll offer it to my colleague Clint.
Well, it was offered to like loads of people first. It was also he's offered to Bronson.
God, that would imagine.
Yeah, because I think actually the thing is Bronson was actually his first choice.
Oh, really?
Bronson plays effectively the same role in Three Fills Time.
Yeah.
And they have different strengths. I mean, I think certainly that sort of landscape of the face look really works for Bronson. He's a lot. It's played even straighter than Clint's version, but obviously the film's more ambitious and has a bit more backstory.
And that's certainly to Bronson's strength as well.
Definitely.
I think Bronson's a really underrated actor.
But he's also one of these people that he looks like he's been chiselled out of stone. You can't. When he stands there in a gunfight with you, even though it's the quality of shooting that's going to decide it, you just naturally would look at him and think, I don't know that a bullet would even pierce him, would it? He's much more intimidating than Clint.
If you look at it like Bronson in his 60s, he's done films like when he's like topless and he's like he put most like 30-year-olds to shame.
Yeah,
like the guy was ripped.
I mean, sadly, a lot of people will remember him for his Michael Winner stuff, and while some of that wasn't awful, he did end up in a lot of sort of direct-to-DVD stuff like 10 to Midnight, which is kind of exploitative. It's not that good. I mean, when you go back and see him in his pomp,
Are we ever going to do a Charles Bronson series?
No. It's a bit like not as extreme as, but a bit like Christopher Lee, too prolific for there to be enough quality control.
Yeah.
The only one you could do a series is like a Death Wish one. That's the only like one you go like, right, that's a series.
Yeah. I mean, you could do a Michael Winner one because he did do some good films with Michael Winner.
He did.
He did one called Chatto's Land, a west, because he did a couple of westerns with Michael Winner, where he was he was like a mixed race Native American.
It makes me like, I'm looking at Clint Eastwood's Wikipedia page at the moment, right? So in the sort of sidebar you get the basics about him. So funny enough, the first thing on there is 30th Mayor of Carmel by the Sea, because he was a mayor for a while, and of course public office tends to go higher. Then it tells you his date of birth and his political parties and his spouses and domestic partners and everything. Then it comes down to children, and it just says at least 8.
He's been busy.
What sort of life have you had where you I don't know.
At least 8.
It's around 8. I don't know. It says including Kyle, Alison, Scott, and Francesca.
He's been busy.
8 that I'm aware of.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
Like, we're going into kind of Donald Trump, Boris Johnson territory now. Oh dear.
Yeah.
I'm not comparing the two because they are.
Well, Boris Johnson would have been shit in this film.
He's a bit crap, and Eastwood is infinitely better.
So at least 8. We've covered Scott in when we did Fast and Furious because he was in the last couple of those. Scott really does look like him. He looks like a young Clint Eastwood.
Doesn't he? Oh my gosh.
He does.
Michael Winner did the Sentinel, which is a horror film set in New York, which is which is something you don't necessarily think Michael Winner does horror, but it's actually quite decent horror.
I think as well he got coloured by his later films in that by the end he was sticking out stuff like Dirty Weekend, and it was all very. It was like the adult version of Canon films or something, all very cheap, all very knocked out, all a little bit exploitative and not very good. And I think it obscures the fact that a bit earlier on he was making much more interesting stuff. Chatto's Landing. I'm looking at that mechanic.
And a lot of people hated him as well.
He wasn't always the most likable. Although towards the end of his life, he was on Twitter most nights.
Yeah.
And I used to quite like him on there. You know what I mean? And then eventually, about 18 months before he
it's quite
died.
entertaining.
Yeah, about 18 months before he died, he went on holiday somewhere, and he caught some awful bug virus, something like that, maybe a bite off something.
Oh, yeah, he got the MRSA.
It basically destroyed his liver, and
Yeah, he was really poorly.
he was on borrowed time after that. I didn't realise he did a remake of the Big Sleep with Robin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he ate steak tartare 4 days in a row,
Right.
and that's what kills.
Yeah. You think maybe have it medium rare, Michael? Yeah. He had between 18 months and 2 years to live. Yeah. And he lost an immense amount of weight. And but anyway, so that's that was just sort of coming out.
He should have calmed down on
Calm down, dear. It was a commercial.
Then when he was with Jenny C.
Unfortunately, that was really sad. His immense film career was boiled down to this really inane.
Well, the thing I best remember,
catchphrase.
the thing I think of first is he was living with Jenny Seagrove, the actress, and then he got one of these News of the World gotchas on him because he was having an affair with the girl who played Callie in Grange Hill a few years before.
Oh.
A few years before, she was of age. She was like mid-20s by this point. But yeah,
Oh,
the one,
still.
it was a bit grim. But there you go. Right. So, has everyone done final thoughts?
It's
I
a
have.
classic. Listeners, go see it. Check out this film. Oh my gosh, I'm
Yeah,
glad I waited this long.
It's iconic.
Definitely. I use that word a lot, but it really is iconic.
How would you know it's iconic though, Chris?
What? Is this a genuine or is it a segue?
How would you?
I was thinking, what are you getting at there, Dave?
Well, how would you know? Because I know how these things tend to go. You're probably calling it a pound full of fisting or something, right? I'm not convinced your knowledge base is going to be that high.
Well, as you know, we are supplied with facts of some degree.
Yes, we did. But where would we find those?
With our trusty host Becca, who always supplies us with.
I don't know why I asked that, because it's the same person every week, really.
Same bloody person, oh god.
Becca, fact us.
Factoids. Yes. So, I mean, I think a lot of these facts have already been revealed already. So I've just gone for some generalised facts. So, listeners, if you know them already, that's fine. Just scrape the bottom of the barrel. Just some generalised facts. Lifted from imdb.com, so you can go read them yourself. Spaghetti Western obviously didn't exist prior to these films. According to an interview with Clint Eastwood, it comes from the Japanese market and wanted to separate the Italian-made westerns from the US-made westerns. I think they called them macaroni westerns to begin with.
I prefer tagliatelle myself.
Well, yeah, I'm quite partial to penny, actually.
What, from the Big Bang
shape of
Theory?
it kind of holds the sauce,
Oh, right.
apparently.
I thought you meant some woman called Penny. I thought you were making a major lifestyle announcement there.
No, my boyfriend would be quite surprised. But I could also shoehorn in another Thunderbirds reference there with Penny, but never mind. So yeah, no, I thought that was quite interesting. Obviously, the genre obviously is known for obviously being made in Italy and abroad, apart from the US. So that's quite interesting. Made me laugh. The film was made sort of in Spain, Italy, various other European locations for no money. I think a budget of, as you mentioned, Dave, like $200,000. Leading man Clint Eastwood in his first big screen role pretty much kind of brought his own wardrobe with him, bought from in and around kind of Santa Monica, California. And a lot of his kind of outfit came from his work on Rawhide, so like his boots, spurs, cock pistol, and his belt came from his uniform, his costume on Rawhide. Poncho was bought in Spain, whilst on location. Apparently he still owns it and he's never washed it, apparently. Also he says in an interview. So it must stink to high heaven. Fun fact number 3, due to the international nature of this film, Eastwood didn't add his voice to the soundtrack until 1967, and the film was being prepared for US release. I think 64 was a domestic release, and then kind of 66, 67, 68 came the was gonna say Western release, but that doesn't really that don't really make sense for US and UK release in other Western territories. Many Westerns have been actually made in Italy up to this point for the domestic market, but this is the first film to receive US and international critical acclaim. And indeed, as we mentioned right at the start of the film, this is why some of the cast and crew have American-sounding names. So, like Sergio Leone is Bob Robertson, and Ennio Morricone is Dan Savio, for example. Fun fact number 4, as we mentioned, this film is a remake of Kurosawa's classic film Yojimbo, which I can't pronounce, so I'm just going to pronounce it like that.
Yojimbo.
Yojimbo, Usagi Yojimbo. But yeah, I as we, I mangle these names, so I can only apologise. And obviously, due to the similarities of the two, Kurosawa famously sued the filmmakers and won. I think he received 15% of the film's worldwide gross. I went on to say that he made more money from that than he did of his original film. And also, as we just chatted about now, other actors considered for the role include Henry Fonda, James Coburn, and Charles Bronson, who turned it down, saying the worst script he'd ever read. Richard Harrison also next to decline. And then obviously, as Charlie mentioned, it was passed to Rawhide co-star Eric Fleming, who said, check out my colleague Clint Eastwood, and the rest of the say is history.
I do think it's rather cheeky for him to sue, seeing that Yojimbo is actually based off another book called Red Harvest.
Yeah, Dashiell Hammett.
Yeah.
So yeah, where's he in all this?
It's just like, well, you could sort. Well, technically, it's off base of the of that, really, isn't it? So I don't know. I find that's a bit cheeky.
Yeah, just a little bit. I mean, nothing's kind of really original, isn't it? It all comes from somewhere. So
yeah.
Well, I suppose it's whether it's officially based, whether they have the right to do it.
Yeah,
no,
well,
that's it, exactly. It's always like adaptation or kind of a spin-off or inspired by as one of those things, isn't it? So.
I mean, I don't know. It's like what you can prove, or I don't know. So it's what you make the best case for. It's hard for me to say because I haven't seen Yojimbo, so I can't really say for any certainty what the or Red Harvest. So I can't say where the similarities end and start, really.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sad to say that's one of his that I've not read. So I must try to seek it out.
But there we are. So. That's us done for Fistful of Dollars.
Okay, as for social media, you can find me at the Pasty Kid 1976 on Twitter.
You can find me at Cinematronics. You can also find all the other episodes on Podbean. Just search for Do You Expect Us to Talk? We'll be on there.
You can find me at Films on Wax on Twitter.
And you can find us on Twitter at Do You Expect Us to Talk. You can also find us on Facebook, Do You Expect Us to Talk. On YouTube, to search for Do You Expect Us to Talk, and we're also on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Podbean, Podbay, wherever you pick up your podcasts. Whichever platform you're on, don't forget to rate us, review us, give us a like and a share. If you're on Facebook, just recommend us to all your friends. Why not update your status? I'm listening to Do You Expect Us to Talk? Why not check it out? Please kindly leave us a glowing 5-star review. It helps us to grow and attract more listeners.
I like the fact you made it sound very jaunty there. Hey, I'm listening to so check it out.
I'm kind of borrowing from another podcast that I listen to, so I'm sure they don't listen, so hopefully they won't mind too much.
On a completely unrelated point, and I'll just mention it while I'm here, I think most people have seen it now, certainly the sort of quality of person who'd be listening to this show, but Christopher Nolan's Memento is just dropped on Netflix.
Oh.
If you've not seen it, give it a look. Because I think it's still strongly in the argument for his best film.
I haven't watched it for a while, but I always look at Prestige. Maybe it might be his best film.
The Prestige is very good. Yeah, the Prestige is very good.
That seems to get forgotten about.
I haven't really loved his last 10 years of filmmaking, but his first 10 years were a bit special. And Memento wasn't technically his first; the following was, but Memento was like his big break. Really.
I need to track that down. It's got
Mike it stars Mike from Neighbours and the woman from The Matrix.
Yeah, Jack Davenport.
Jack Davenport.
I think I'm thinking of a different film.
You are thinking. You're not thinking of like. What are you thinking of?
I'm thinking of a different film.
You're thinking of
cut that part out.
The Secret Service Kingsman, aren't you? He was at the start of that.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one.
No, it's not that. Memento.
No, I'm confusing it with another film, but anyway. Cut that part out.
One's a spy romp, and the other one's about a man with a head injury.
Yes.
They're slightly different.
No. I think there was a short film that was inspired by that film starring Jack. Anyway, I've got him on the brain. Never mind. Chop it out.
You were just minding your own business, thinking about Jack Davenport. That's fine.
Just because there's a program.
There's worse things to be thinking about.
Yeah. I wonder if she was thinking about that bit where he was talking about lesbian spank inferno in Coupling.
No.
All right.
They're showing, they're screening Coupling, like that classic dodgy 90s series, and they happen to be in it, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, you know the 90s one from the year 2000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was literally from the early 2000s. So.
He's hosting a dinner party in one episode, and he has to explain why he's been watching a film called Lesbian Spank Inferno, and he can't just
really cringe.
He can't just admit that it's because there's naked women in it. He's trying to like sell its artistic merits and stuff.
Plus, it's a series by the same writer behind Doctor Who.
Stephen Moffat.
There's a connection there somewhere.
Stephen Moffat wrote the best sitcom no one's ever seen, and it's one called Joking Apart. With Robert Bathurst, and it's about a stand-up comedian whose marriage falls apart. She cheats on him, but it's really, really funny. But hardly anyone watched it when it was released. Yeah.
No, it's a great shame.
It's really good.
What's it called?
Joking Apart.
Check it out. It'll probably be one of those shows that might end up on Talking Pics TV or Bill Network or something.
I rewatched it about 15 years later, and I must admit it wasn't quite as brilliant as I remember, but it was really, really funny. And you know how in Coupling he just has his characters say things that you think but you would never say out loud.
No.
And if you did, you'd be embarrassed. I mean, he's in a restaurant with her when they're dating, and you're seeing it from his perspective. So he's clearly really attracted to her. So you see him looking at her lips and a little bit at her cleavage. It's not wildly voyeuristic. He's just liking her and he's attracted to her, but his mind obviously wanders because she suddenly says, "Oh, there's the waiter, call him," and he just turns and goes, "Oral sex," because that's what he was thinking about when he was.
It's so dodgy.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so back for part 2 with Mr. Leone next week, which means Becca.
Do you expect to talk or return for a few dollars more?